The phone rang just as Clara was about to turn off the lights and crawl into bed. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand, 11:47 p.m., and sighed. Late-night calls were never good news. With a sinking feeling in her chest, she reached for the phone, her fingers brushing against its cool surface before answering. "Hello?" Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile, as though she already knew what was coming. On the other end of the line, a man's voice spoke slowly, carefully, like he was choosing each word with precision. It was Mr. Thompson, the undertaker from her hometown. He told her that her mother, Evelyn, had passed away earlier that evening. The words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. For a moment, all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing, shallow and uneven. Her mind raced, trying to process what she'd just heard. Dead? How could her mother be dead? They hadn't spoken in months, not since their last argument over something trivial yet somehow monumental enough to leave both of them hurt. Clara sat down heavily on the edge of her bed, the phone still pressed to her ear. Mr. Thompson continued, talking, explaining that Evelyn had fallen ill suddenly and passed away before anyone could reach her. There were no details beyond that, no explanation of what kind of illness it was or how quickly it had taken her. Just silence after his words, filled only by the faint hum of static on the line. Clara nodded absently, even though he couldn't see her. I'll come home, she managed to say, her voice cracking under the weight of emotions she wasn't ready to face. Hanging up the phone felt like pulling a bandage off too quickly. It stung more than she expected. Clara stared at the blank wall across from her, her thoughts swirling like storm clouds. Memories of her mother began flooding back, unbidden and overwhelming. Evelyn had always been strong-willed, fiercely independent, and sometimes impossible to understand. Growing up, Clara often found herself caught between admiration for her mother's resilience and frustration at her stubbornness. Their relationship had grown strained over the years, especially after Clara left their small coastal town to build a life of her own in the city. But despite their differences, Evelyn was still her mother. And now she was gone. The realization settled over Clara like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. She thought about all the things they'd left unsaid, the apologies that never came, the hugs that never happened, the laughter they hadn't shared in years. Guilt gnawed at her insides, sharp and unrelenting. Had she done enough to try and mend their fractured relationship? Or had she let pride get in the way one too many times? The next morning, Clara packed a small suitcase. With clothes and essentials, her movements mechanical and detached. Every item she placed inside felt heavier than it should have, as if her grief was weighing everything down. As she zipped up the bag, she paused to glance around her tiny apartment. This space had become her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the complications of her past. But now she had no choice but to confront them head-on. The train ride back to her hometown was long and lonely. Clara stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past in streaks of green and brown. Her mind kept replaying snippets of conversations she'd had with her mother over the years. The laughter, the tears, the arguments. Each memory brought a fresh wave of sadness, followed by anger at herself for not making things right sooner. What if this was her chance to finally understand Evelyn, to piece together the puzzle of who she really was beneath the tough exterior? When the train finally pulled into the station, Clara stepped off feeling like a stranger in familiar territory. The air smelled different here, saltier, tinged with the scent of seaweed and damp earth. She walked through the quiet streets, taking in the sights she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, yet somehow more vivid. The bakery on the corner where she used to buy freshly baked bread. The park where she'd played as a child. The little bookstore her mother loved to visit. These landmarks were like ghosts of her past, haunting her with reminders of a life she'd left behind. As she approached her childhood home, a knot formed in her stomach. The house looked exactly the same. White siding, blue shutters, a garden, overrun with wildflowers. But there was no light in the windows, no sign of life within. It felt empty, abandoned, just like Clara's heart. She hesitated at the front door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Finally, she turned it and stepped inside, bracing herself for the flood of memories that awaited her. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards echo. Clara wandered from room to room, touching objects that once belonged to her mother: a worn-out armchair, a stack of old books, a photograph of them together when she was young. Each item seemed to whisper stories of days gone by, moments frozen in time. Yet none of them offered answers to the questions swirling in Clara's mind. Why had her mother chosen to live such a solitary life? What secrets had she been keeping? Later, that afternoon, Clara decided to visit some of the neighbors. She needed to hear their voices, to feel connected to the community she'd once been part of. Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who lived next door, greeted her with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Clara," she said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry about your mother." Other neighbors echoed similar sentiments, offering condolences and sharing fond memories of Evelyn. But there was something else in their tone, an undertone of curiosity, maybe even unease, that Clara couldn't quite place. One neighbor, Mr. Daniels, mentioned casually that Evelyn had become increasingly reclusive in recent years. "She didn't talk much about what she was doing," he said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "Just kept to herself, you know. Always seemed like she had something on her mind." Another neighbor, Mrs. Lewis, chimed in, saying, "She was a good woman, but she carried secrets. Everyone knew that." Secrets? The word lingered in Clara's mind long after she'd returned home. Secrets about what? And why would her mother keep them hidden, even from her own daughter? The questions swirled endlessly, leaving Clara restless and uneasy. She realized that coming back to this town wasn't just about saying goodbye to her mother. It was about uncovering the truth about who Evelyn really was. Because deep down, Clara suspected that the woman lying in that coffin wasn't the same woman she'd known growing up. Not entirely. That night, as Clara lay in her old bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something bigger than grief, bigger than guilt. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Whatever it was, she knew one thing for certain. This trip home was going to change her life forever. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sleepy coastal town. Clara woke up to the sound of seagulls crying in the distance, their calls mingling with the gentle crash of waves against the shore. For a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling as if trying to will herself back into the safety of sleep. But reality was relentless, and it came rushing back to her in waves. Her mother's death, the empty house, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on her chest. She got out of bed and shuffled to the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating dust particles floating lazily in the air. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old wood, a scent that brought back memories of mornings spent here with Evelyn. Back then, her mother would hum softly while preparing breakfast, her hands moving deftly between pots and pans. Now, the silence felt deafening, like a void swallowing her whole. Clara made herself a cup of tea, savoring the warmth it brought to her cold fingers. She needed something to ground her, something familiar in a world that suddenly felt alien. As she sipped the steaming liquid, she glanced around the kitchen. Everything was exactly as she remembered it. The chipped mug rack, the faded floral wallpaper, the worn-out tablecloth. But somehow, it all felt different, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit anymore. Determined to distract herself, Clara decided to take a walk around town. Maybe reconnecting with the people who had known her family for years would help ease the heaviness in her heart. Or maybe, just maybe, someone might have answers to the questions swirling in her mind. Questions about why her mother had grown so distant, so secretive. Questions about the cryptic comments from neighbors hinting at things left unsaid. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional car passing by or the chatter of children playing in front yards. Clara walked slowly, taking in every detail. The cobblestone pathways lined with wildflowers, the weathered benches overlooking the ocean, the small shops with hand-painted signs hanging above their doors. It was strange how much smaller everything seemed now compared to when she was a child. Back then, this town had been her entire universe. Now it felt like a snapshot frozen in time, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Her first stop was Mrs. Harper's house next door. The elderly woman had always been kind to Clara, often bringing over fresh-baked cookies or offering advice when life felt overwhelming. When Clara knocked on the door, Mrs. Harper opened it almost immediately, her face lighting up with recognition before falling into an expression of sorrow. "Oh dear," she said, pulling Clara into a tight embrace. "I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." They sat together on Mrs. Harper's porch, sipping lemonade as they talked about Evelyn. Mrs. Harper shared stories of how Evelyn used to volunteer at the local library, helping organize book drives and reading sessions for kids. She loved books, Mrs. Harper said with a soft smile. Always had her nose buried in one. I think it was her way of escaping, you know? Escaping whatever it was she didn't want to talk about. Escaping what? Clara wondered silently, her curiosity piqued. She wanted to ask more but held back, sensing that pushing too hard might make Mrs. Harper uncomfortable. Instead, she listened intently, piecing together fragments of her mother's life that she hadn't known existed. According to Mrs. Harper, Evelyn had become quieter over the years, retreating further into herself until she barely interacted with anyone outside of polite exchanges at the grocery store or post office. After leaving Mrs. Harper's house, Clara continued her journey through town, stopping by other familiar faces along the way. At the bakery, Mr. Patel greeted her warmly, handing her a free loaf of bread for old time's sake. He mentioned how Evelyn had recently started buying supplies in bulk, stocking up on canned goods and non-perishable items. She said she wanted to be prepared, he recalled with a shrug. But prepared for what, I don't know. Prepared for what? The phrase echoed in Clara's mind like a riddle she couldn't solve. What could Evelyn possibly have been preparing for? A storm, an emergency, something else entirely? Each new piece of information only deepened the mystery surrounding her mother's final days. Next, Clara visited the park where she'd spent countless afternoons playing as a child. The swings creaked gently in the breeze, and the sandbox was filled with tiny footprints left behind by neighborhood kids. Sitting on a bench nearby was Mr. Daniels, the retired fisherman who had taught Clara how to cast a line when she was little. He waved her over, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Long time no see, kiddo," he said, patting the space beside him. As they chatted, Mr. Daniels revealed that Evelyn had taken long walks along the beach almost every evening. She liked to watch the sunset, he explained. Said it helped her clear her head. He paused, scratching his beard thoughtfully. But sometimes she'd look over her shoulder like she was expecting someone, or something, to follow her. Made me wonder if she was running from something. Running from something. The word sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Was her mother hiding from danger? And if so, why hadn't she reached out for help? Why had she chosen to face it alone? By the time Clara returned home, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She stood on the porch, watching the colors shift and fade, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and determination. This trip wasn't just about grieving her mother's loss. It was about understanding her. About uncovering the truth hidden beneath layers of secrecy and silence. Inside the house, Clara wandered from room to room again, searching for clues that might shed light on Evelyn's mysterious behavior. In the living room, she found a stack of old newspapers tucked away in a corner. Flipping through them, she noticed articles circled in red ink, stories about missing persons, thefts, and suspicious activities in neighboring towns. Her stomach churned as she realized these weren't random selections. They were deliberate, choices carefully marked for reasons she couldn't yet comprehend. Upstairs in her mother's bedroom, Clara discovered a locked drawer in the nightstand. She hesitated, torn between respect for Evelyn's privacy and the burning need to know what secrets lay hidden inside. After a few moments of internal debate, she retrieved a paperclip from the desk and began fiddling with the lock. With a satisfying, Click. The drawer sprang open, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. Among the items was a faded photograph of Evelyn standing beside a man Clara didn't recognize. They looked happy, smiling broadly as if sharing a private joke. On the back of the photo, Evelyn had written, "Never forget." Forget what? Clara wondered, her pulse quickening. Another document caught her eye, a map of the coastline dotted with markings and scribbled notes. One location stood out prominently, an abandoned lighthouse on the outskirts of town. Clara's mind raced as she stared at the map. Could this be connected to her mother's secrecy? To the warnings from neighbors about Evelyn carrying burdens too heavy to share? Whatever the truth was, Clara knew she wouldn't find it sitting idly at home. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would visit the lighthouse. She would follow the trail her mother had left behind, no matter where it led. That night, as Clara drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with images of her mother walking along the beach, glancing over her shoulder as if pursued by shadows. In the dream, Evelyn turned to Clara and whispered, "Find me." The words lingered even after she woke, echoing in her mind like a promise or a plea. The next morning, Clara woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The discovery of the map and the mysterious photograph had ignited something within her, a determination to uncover the truth about her mother's life, no matter how unsettling it might be. She dressed quickly, pulling on a pair of sturdy boots and an old jacket that smelled faintly of salt water and memories. Before leaving the house, she tucked the map and the photograph into her backpack, along with a flashlight and a notebook. If this was going to be a journey into Evelyn's secrets, Clara wanted to be prepared. Her first stop was the local church where the wake was being held. It wasn't scheduled until later that afternoon, but Clara needed to speak with Mr. Thompson, the undertaker who had called her with the news of her mother's passing. Something about his tone during their brief phone conversation had struck her as odd, not quite hesitant but guarded, as though he was holding back information. Now, standing outside the small stone building, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Whatever answers she sought, they might start here. Inside, the church was dimly lit, its air cool and heavy with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. Rows of pews stretched toward the altar, adorned with white lilies that seemed almost too perfect against the somber backdrop. Clara spotted Mr. Thompson near the front, adjusting the arrangement of candles surrounding the closed coffin. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from concentration to mild surprise. "Miss Clara," he said, straightening up and offering a polite nod. "I didn't expect you so early." "I need to talk to you," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "About my mother." Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, glancing around the empty church as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then with a sigh, he gestured for her to follow him to a quiet corner. They sat side by side on one of the pews, the silence between them thick and uncomfortable. Clara took a deep breath before speaking. "You mentioned on the phone that my mother passed away suddenly," she began. "But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Mr. Thompson rubbed his temples, his brow furrowing as though wrestling with some internal conflict. "Your mother," he started, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. "She was a remarkable woman, Miss Clara. Strong-willed, private, always kept to herself. But these last few months, well, let's just say she seemed uneasy." "Uneasy?" Clara pressed, leaning forward slightly. "What do you mean?" "She came to me a while back," Mr. Thompson continued, lowering his voice. "Asked me to make arrangements for her funeral, just in case," she said. "At the time, I thought it was strange, but not unheard of. People sometimes like to plan ahead. But when she passed, things weren't what they seemed." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean things weren't what they seemed?" Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "When we went to collect her body, the house was unusual. Locked up tight, curtains drawn, everything spotless. Almost like she'd been preparing for something or someone to come after her. And then, when we opened the casket, he trailed off. leaving the sentence hanging in the air like a question mark. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. "What did you find?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "What's inside the coffin?" Mr. Thompson sighed again, clearly reluctant to continue. "Nothing," he admitted finally. "The coffin is empty." For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred as though the world around her had tilted off its axis. Empty? How could the coffin be empty? She opened her mouth to ask more questions, but no words came out. Instead, she sat frozen, staring at Mr. Thompson as though waiting for him to laugh and tell her it was all a terrible joke. "I know it sounds impossible," he said quietly, misinterpreting her stunned silence. "But I swear, Miss Clara, I don't have any explanation for it. We followed protocol, checked every detail, and yet nothing. No body. Just this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to her gingerly. "We found this inside." Instead, Clara took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it slowly as though afraid of what she might read. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, neat, precise, familiar. Her eyes scanned the page, taking in each word with growing disbelief. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I've done what I had to do. Please don't grieve for me. I'm not gone, not really. I made this choice to protect us both. There are people who would stop at nothing to harm me, and through me, you. I couldn't risk putting you in danger, so I disappeared. Let them think I'm dead. Let them believe they've won. I wish I could explain everything, but time is short, and trust is a luxury I can't afford. All I can tell you is this. Follow the clues I left behind. They'll lead you to the truth. Be careful, my love. Danger may still be close. With all my heart, Mom." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she finished reading. The letter was both heartbreaking and infuriating. How could her mother disappear without giving her a chance to say goodbye? To understand why. Yet beneath the anger was a flicker of hope, a chance to reconnect with Evelyn, even if only through unraveling the mystery she'd left behind. Clara looked up at Mr. Thompson, who was watching her with a mixture of sympathy and unease. "Did anyone else see this?" she asked, clutching the letter tightly. "No," he replied firmly. "Just me. I thought you deserved to know the truth." She nodded, grateful for his discretion but overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility now resting on her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, "for telling me, for keeping her secret." Mr. Thompson gave her a small, sad smile. "Your mother loved you deeply, Miss Clara. Everything she did out of love. Don't forget that." As Clara left the church, the letter clutched in her hand, she felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore. It was about honoring her mother's courage, her sacrifice. Evelyn had faked her death to protect Clara, and now it was Clara's turn to protect herself, and perhaps uncover the truth that had driven her mother into hiding. Back at home, Clara spread the contents of her backpack across the kitchen table. The map, the photograph, and now the letter. She studied each item closely, searching for connections, patterns, anything that might point her in the right direction. The map led to the abandoned lighthouse, but what awaited her there? Was it a trap, a clue, or simply another layer of her mother's enigmatic life? Tomorrow, she decided she would go to the lighthouse, alone. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it, for Evelyn, for herself, and for the bond they shared, stronger than ever, even beyond the grave. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the curtains, casting long shadows across Clara's bedroom. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of the empty coffin and the cryptic letter from her mother. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's handwriting, those familiar loops and curves that carried both love and secrets. Now, as she prepared to visit the abandoned lighthouse, a mix of emotions swirled inside her: fear, determination, and an ache for answers that refused to fade. Clara packed a small bag with essentials: a flashlight, water, a notebook, and the photograph of Evelyn with the mysterious man. She hesitated for a moment, then added the map and the letter to the bag. These items felt like lifelines, tangible connections to her mother in a world that suddenly seemed full of unanswered questions. As she zipped up the bag, she glanced at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked pale but resolute, her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore. It was about reclaiming the pieces of her mother's life, and maybe even her own, that had been lost along the way. The drive to the lighthouse took longer than she expected. The narrow coastal road wound its way through dense patches of pine trees and rocky cliffs overlooking the ocean. The salty breeze whipped through the car windows, carrying with it the faint scent of seaweed and brine. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the leather. With each passing mile, the weight of what she might discover grew heavier, pressing down on her chest like a stone. When she finally arrived, the lighthouse loomed ahead of her, its once white walls now streaked with grime and weathered by decades of salt spray. The structure stood isolated at the edge of a jagged cliff, surrounded by tall grass that swayed gently in the wind. It looked like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Clara parked her car nearby and stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel path. For a moment she simply stood there, taking in the eerie beauty of the place. The lighthouse seemed frozen in time, untouched by the modern world, yet somehow alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. As she approached the entrance, Clara noticed that the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that someone else had been here recently, or maybe they were still inside. She paused, listening intently for any sound beyond the creaking of the old building and the distant crash of waves below. Hearing nothing, she pushed the door open further, wincing as it groaned loudly in protest. Inside, the air was damp and musty, thick with the smell of mildew and rusted metal. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the cracked tile floor. Clara pulled out her flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom like a knife. Slowly, she began to explore the space, her footsteps echoing softly as she moved deeper into the lighthouse. The ground floor was cluttered with remnants of its past life. Old furniture covered in dust, shelves lined with jars of forgotten preserves, and stacks of yellowed newspapers piled haphazardly in corners. Clara ran her fingers over the dusty surfaces, leaving faint trails in the grime. Each item she touched felt like a relic from another era, a fragment of history left behind by those who had once called this place home. But none of it belonged to Evelyn. Not yet. She climbed the spiral staircase leading to the upper levels, her heart pounding with anticipation. The stairs groaned under her weight, their iron railing cool against her palm. At the top, she found herself in the lantern room, where the massive glass lens of the lighthouse still stood intact, though coated in layers of dirt. Through the grimy panes, she could see the endless expanse of the ocean stretching out before her, its waves glinting in the sunlight like shards of glass. But it wasn't the view that caught her attention. In the center of the room, resting on a rickety table, was a small wooden box. It was plain and unassuming, its surface scratched and worn, but something about it drew Clara closer. Her pulse quickened as she reached out to touch it, half expecting it to vanish like everything else surrounding her mother's disappearance. But it was real. It was solid, and when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside the box was a collection of objects that seemed random at first glance. A tarnished key, a folded piece of paper, a delicate silver necklace, and a tiny vial filled with sand. Clara picked up the paper first, unfolding it carefully. It was another note from Evelyn, written in the same neat handwriting that had haunted her dreams. My darling Clara, if you found this, it means you're brave enough to face the truth. The key will unlock what I couldn't carry with me. The necklace belonged to your grandmother. It's yours now. And the sand. Remember our walks on the beach? Remember how we used to say the ocean held all the answers? This is my reminder to you. Keep looking. Keep searching. Trust no one but yourself. With love always, Mom. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she read the words. The note was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a bittersweet blend of farewell and encouragement. She slipped the necklace around her neck, feeling its cool weight settle against her skin. Then she turned her attention to the key. What did it unlock? Where would it lead her next? Clara's gaze swept the room, searching for anything that might match the size or shape of the key. Her eyes landed on a locked cabinet tucked away in a shadowy corner. Heart racing, she crossed the room and inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, clicking open with a satisfying sound. Inside the cabinet, she found a stack of documents bound together with string, along with a journal bearing Evelyn's name on the cover. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, and began to sift through the contents. The documents appeared to be legal papers, property deeds, bank statements, and letters addressed to Evelyn from people whose names Clara didn't recognize. They mentioned transactions involving large sums of money and references to the artifact. Whatever it was, it seemed important enough to warrant secrecy and paranoia. The journal, however, was what truly captivated her. Flipping through its pages, Clara discovered entries detailing Evelyn's fears, her suspicions, and her desperate attempts to stay one step ahead of whoever was pursuing her. One passage stood out in particular. I don't know how much longer. I can run. They're getting closer every day. If anything happens to me, Clara must never find out. She deserves a normal life, not the chaos I've brought upon myself. But if she does, if she comes looking for me, I hope these clues will guide her safely to the truth. Protect her, please. Protect my daughter. By the time Clara finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. Her mother's words painted a picture of a woman torn between love and survival, a woman willing to sacrifice everything, including her relationship with her daughter, to ensure Clara's safety. It was devastating and inspiring all at once, a testament to the lengths a parent would go to shield their child from harm. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light through the dirty windows, Clara gathered the items from the cabinet and placed them back in her bag. She knew she couldn't stay here forever. There was still so much to uncover, so many questions to answer. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, sitting amidst the ruins of the lighthouse and letting the enormity of her mother's actions wash over her. Evelyn hadn't abandoned her. She had chosen to disappear out of love, leaving behind a trail of breadcrumbs meant to lead Clara to the truth. And as daunting as the journey ahead might be, Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. She wasn't alone. Her mother's courage lived on in the clues she'd left behind, and in Clara herself. With renewed determination, Clara stood up and made her way back down the spiral staircase. The lighthouse may have been abandoned, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with memories, secrets, and the promise of answers, and Clara was ready to follow wherever they led her next. The drive back to her childhood home felt surreal, as though Clara were caught between two worlds, the one she had known all her life and the mysterious, shadowy realm her mother had inhabited. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white against the leather, as the car bumped along the winding coastal road. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The ocean stretched endlessly beside her, its waves crashing rhythmically against the rocks below, a sound that usually brought comfort, but now only amplified her unease. Clara's mind raced with everything she had discovered at the lighthouse. The journal, the documents, the cryptic references to the artifact. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to raise more questions than answers. What was this artifact? Why had Evelyn risked so much to protect it? And who were the people pursuing her? These thoughts swirled in her head like storm clouds, dark and ominous, threatening to overwhelm her. Yet amidst the chaos there was also clarity. Evelyn hadn't abandoned her. She had fought tirelessly to keep Clara safe, even if it meant sacrificing their relationship. That realization gave Clara strength, a quiet resolve to see this through no matter where it led. When she arrived home, the house felt different somehow. It wasn't just the absence of Evelyn, it was as though the air itself carried traces of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Clara set her bag down on the kitchen table and spread out the items she'd brought back from the lighthouse. The journal sat at the center, its worn cover bearing Evelyn's name in faded ink. Taking a deep breath, Clara opened it to the first page and began reading. The entries started years ago, long before Clara had left for the city. At first, they read like ordinary diary entries, reflections on daily life, musings about books Evelyn had read, or memories of walks along the beach. But as Clara flipped further into the journal, the tone shifted. The writing became hurried, anxious, filled with references to strangers watching her, strange phone calls late at night, and unmarked envelopes arriving in the mail. One entry stood out. "I don't know how they found me. I thought I'd covered my tracks completely, but someone knows. Someone is following me. I can feel their eyes everywhere, in the market, on the street, even outside my bedroom window. I've started locking every door, closing every curtain. If anything happens to me, Clara must never know. She deserves better than this life I've stumbled into." Clara's chest tightened as she read those words. They painted a vivid picture of a woman living in constant fear, isolated not by choice but by necessity. Her mother's paranoia hadn't been unfounded. It had been real, tangible, suffocating. The journal went on to describe Evelyn's growing suspicion that she was being targeted because of something she had inherited, an ancient artifact passed down through generations of her family. According to the entries, the object held immense value, not just monetary but historical, and powerful people wanted it desperately. Evelyn wrote about her efforts to safeguard the artifact, hiding it in various locations while staying one step ahead of those pursuing her. She mentioned names, people she trusted, people she suspected, but nothing concrete enough to identify them. One name appeared repeatedly: Marcus Hale. Clara didn't recognize it, but the way Evelyn referred to him suggested he played a significant role in her mother's story. In one particularly chilling passage, Evelyn described meeting Marcus under duress. "He came to me tonight, said he could help, said he could protect us both. But his eyes, they were cold, calculating. I don't trust him. Still, I have no other options. Tomorrow we meet again. I pray I'm making the right decision." Clara paused, her fingers trembling as she turned the page. The next few entries were frantic, almost illegible, written in haste. Evelyn recounted handing over the artifact to Marcus, believing he would shield it from harm. But within days she realized she had made a grave mistake. Marcus wasn't protecting the artifact, he was using it to manipulate her, forcing her into increasingly dangerous situations. Evelyn wrote about fleeing town overnight, leaving behind nearly everything she owned to escape his reach. The final entries in the journal were heartbreaking. Evelyn detailed her loneliness, her guilt over pushing Clara away, and her determination to ensure her daughter remained safe. She vowed to disappear completely, faking her death to sever ties with anyone who might lead Marcus back to her, or to Clara. The last line of the journal read simply, "If you're reading this, my love, please forgive me. I did what I had to do. Follow the clues. Find the truth. Protect yourself." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she closed the journal. Her mother's pain was palpable, etched into every word, every sentence. Evelyn hadn't been running from danger for herself alone. She had been shielding Clara from forces beyond comprehension. And now, it was Clara's turn to pick up the torch. Determined to press forward, Clara turned her attention to the stack of documents she'd found in the cabinet. Most of them were financial records detailing large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts. Others were letters addressed to Evelyn from individuals whose identities remained obscured by vague signatures or initials. One letter, however, stood out, written on plain stationery with no return address. It contained a single sentence scrawled in bold handwriting. The lighthouse holds the key to your freedom, but beware the tide. Clara frowned, rereading the phrase several times. Beware the tide? What did it mean? Was it a warning? A metaphor? Or something literal tied to the ocean surrounding the lighthouse? She jotted the phrase down in her notebook, circling it twice for emphasis. Whatever it meant, it couldn't be ignored. Her gaze shifted to the small vial of sand Evelyn had left behind. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. The grains sparkled faintly in the fading sunlight, catching the light in a way that seemed almost magical. Could this sand hold significance? Was it part of the artifact? Or merely another clue pointing towards something larger? As night fell, Clara lit a candle and continued piecing together the fragments of her mother's story. She studied the map once more, tracing her finger along the coastline until it reached the lighthouse. Something about the markings near the structure nagged at her, a series of symbols etched faintly into the paper. They resembled coordinates, but without proper tools, she couldn't decipher them fully. Still, they hinted at a hidden location nearby, perhaps accessible during low tide when the ocean receded. A sudden thought struck her. Tomorrow was the day of Evelyn's funeral, or rather the ceremony everyone believed marked her passing. People would gather at the church expecting closure. But what if Evelyn's disappearance wasn't meant to end there? What if the empty coffin and the clues she'd left behind were invitations for Clara to step into her shoes, to finish what she had started? Clara spent the rest of the evening organizing her findings, creating a mental checklist of tasks for the days ahead. First, she needed to investigate the area around the lighthouse during low tide. Second, she had to figure out who Marcus Hale was and whether he still posed a threat. Third, she had to stay vigilant, for Evelyn's sake and for her own. She climbed into bed later that night, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Clara clutched the silver necklace Evelyn had given her close to her heart. Its cool metal reminded her of her mother's presence, guiding her even in death. Sleep came slowly, haunted by dreams of Evelyn standing on the edge of a cliff, whispering, "Follow the tide, my love. Follow the tide." When morning broke, Clara woke with renewed purpose. The journey ahead was daunting, yes, but it was also hers to take. For Evelyn, for the truth, and for herself, she would follow the trail her mother had laid out, no matter how perilous it might become.